Hey there guys, welcome back to Strifinity. Today it's me the Lion. I'm back here with another video. Today I'm doing a Blender tutorial. That's right. You asked for it, some of you asked for it, I asked some of your opinions and you guys are fine with it. Today I'm making a Blender tutorial for this video clip. I made this in under half a day and it's a pretty easy tutorial and I think it's a good base for most of you to start. This is a mostly beginner friendly tutorial, but if you know the basics like the lighting and stuff or like how you add objects, that is great too. I'm not gonna expect you to know the best, and I'm gonna make sure we don't overcomplicate this entire project. So today in this video, I'm going to show you how to set up a scene, set up a camera, set up the rigid body world, set up how do you animate the rigid body world, how do you animate the instigators for the rigid body world, and also any texturing and rendering advice I can give you. Okay. You can check out these timestamps right here. If I'm not too lazy, I probably have them marked. If not, this clip won't make it in the final cut. Anyway, so let's get down to the project file. This is the project file. So as you can see, it's a very rudimentary setup. I have a bunch of pipes, and the idea behind this is these pipes move around and it's instigated by this, I like to call it the collision object. So what that does, it pushes the pipes up the z-axis and then you get this really cool animation. So I'm going to show you how to do all of this right now. So you start with opening a new Blender file. I click A and delete everything on the scene because I don't want any extra objects to influence how I start setting my stuff up. This is how you set your scene up. But before you set up your scene, I have a word of advice. This tutorial is very basic and it won't really demand much from your PC, but I at least expect you to have some good hardware that can run some good games at 1080p. That's the baseline I'm setting for you guys. If you had that good hardware, then you can probably go ahead. But if you don't, you may want to watch the rest of this video. I give you some tips and advices on how do you reduce the amount of load you put on your computer and how to efficiently make everything more usable. But if you really want to learn the basics of Blender, my recommendation is to watch CG Geek's ice cream tutorial. He covers everything you need to know without it being too overcomplicated. Or you can watch the other very famous beginner tutorial, what's his name? Blender Guru's donut tutorial, right? I never did the donut, I did the ice cream, but they're still really great tutorials as a whole. Right, so let's start setting up the scene. I'm not gonna show my keybinds, but if you know some basics, I'll show you how to do that. So what I'm gonna do is, if I'm right, if you do Shift A, it opens up the add menu, which then I'm gonna add myself a cylinder. So now I'm gonna quickly go into the cylinder tab and change these values, right? So when you add the cylinder, you don't make any modifications. You can change its depth and radius. So I'm gonna make this really big, because another thing you need to know about Blender is when we do the rigid body simulation later, Blender does not do well with small particles. You need to have it in a very big size. I recommend having it in a few couple meters tall. I don't know the range about which it works, but I just to be safe, I say you have a really big range. Okay, and then I'm gonna increase the radius, right? Yeah, I'm gonna increase the radius. I like that. And yeah, that's it. So this is my basic cylinder. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to click N, or you can also see, if you see this very small tab, so go to view and increase the end clipping to about 100,000 to 10,000. That way you can avoid clipping and it becomes an issue later. That's an advice, beginner advice I suggest. Okay, then the next step is I click tab to go into edit mode. And I choose the face selection mode. I quickly go ahead and choose these two faces, delete them. I'm going to delete the faces and I'm going to get out of edit mode. Now this is another important feature in Blender that helps you a lot, and that is the modifiers tab. So if you go to the side here and you click this wrench icon, you see the modifiers tab. I'm going to choose the solidify tab. I'm going to quickly just have a scroll into my object, and I'm gonna increase that width. Okay, and I think 0.69 is gonna work. But yeah, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna Control A, or another way to do this is drop down this and click apply. So with that, now you have a pipe, right? Another suggestion I do make is always have a collection called backup or BU, where you can duplicate your object. I shift D to duplicate, and then drag it down into the backup. So every time you feel like you made a mistake with the object while modifying it, you can always go to the backup and pull that out. So what I'm going to do is I'm also going to rename this to base cylinder. So now that's my base cylinder. Another very important thing you need to know while using Blender is always Control S to save. If you save, this is YT tutorial. I forgot how to spell tutorial. Always save your projects, because that helps, always have the habit of pressing Control S, saving your project, so that when you lose it, you don't feel frustrated. Because trust me, it has happened a billion times for me, and it's not a pleasant feeling. The next modifier, that's the array modifier. I'm going to set the X to 0 and Y to 1. And I'm going to increase the count. So now I'm basically duplicating this object without actually having to manually do it. It's a very fast way of doing it, because at the end of the day you need to separate it all into separate instances, which is the fast way of doing this. Another advice I suggest is, if you click numpad, so activate numlock and press 7, it changes you to top view. So it takes you to top view, and then now you can clearly see the gap. And I always suggest you keep a gap of about 1.1 is actually a good gap. So the thing is, when you make this a physics simulation, you make this a rigid body, they don't collide with each other and then cause a lot of glitches, because in the end of the day that could cause a lot of trouble, a lot of problems. So you want to avoid that issue. So what I'm going to do is, now I have that array of pipes. Okay, I'm going to hide this menu, and I'm going to open the modify tab and do another array. And this time it has X as 1, and I'm not going to change that. In fact, if I'm going to change that, I'm going to make that 1.1. So now we have that square like gap, and these gaps are very essential. Please do not forget these gaps. And I'm also going to make this Y axis 0.1. And what that does is, if I go to top view, now you can see it's alternating, and that alternating is what gives that a grid like very satisfying feeling. Make sure this remains at 2, by the way, because if you duplicate it further, you're gonna do that really annoying incline. That's not gonna look good. I want to leave this at 2, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna open another array modifier, and now that I'm gonna do multiple times. So now that is your scene. That is your scene, and as you can already see, this is over 100,000 vertices. That is bad. That's bad for anybody. If you have a good PC, bad PC, you want to avoid that. So now I'm going to show you the camera setup, and now the camera setup is very essential. So now I'm going to shift A, go down to camera, and now you can see I'm going to have to first hide this. You can see there's a very tiny camera. So what you're going to do is S to scale. Now we can scale the camera, so now it's visible. We don't want to make it anything, not going to do any adjustments yet. So now the camera is, you can see the camera. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a good angle that I like, and that I like to see these pipes from. And I think I like this view, so I can see the pipes rise up and rise down. It's very rudimentary. You can always adjust it in finer details later, but just choose a very basic view. And what I'm going to do, now this is important, is with my numlock on, Control Alt 0. Now what that does is it brings the camera to you. Rather than you going to the camera comes to you, and now what you're seeing, the camera sees. So now, if you can see, oh my god, the camera's all the way back there. I want to scale it up. Don't worry, scaling up the camera does not affect what you see. It just helps you see it better in the viewport. So now this is what I'm seeing, okay? This is the angle. And now this is where I start refining and adjusting everything. So I'm going to leave my camera as it is. Actually, no, I'm not. Another thing I want you to do is, when you go to the camera has 3 different modes, out of which I only know about 2. So sorry. There's the perspective mode, which basically copies how you look from an actual camera. That's simulating how an actual camera works. What we want to use here is the orthographic view. It's basically how you look in the Blender. What you see as a Blender viewport, it shows the same thing as a render. It's a little confusing. Don't mind that. All you do is just click orthographic, and this slider is all you have to worry about. Not Shift XY, maybe Shift XY, but this slider. As you zoom in and zoom out, this basically acts like a zoom in, zoom out, and you can probably shift a little bit X and Y, but that's it. You don't have to do much. This is not too much work. What I'm going to do is, now I'm going to choose with the orthographic scaling what size of my pipes, what pipe size will appeal to me. So not the scaling of the pipe itself, but how the camera looks at the pipes, how close is the camera to the pipes. I'm gonna do, yeah, this looks good to me. So this involves a lot of trial and error, where you need to find a satisfying angle that appeals to you as a creator. And to me, this looks good. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drop. So this is another important thing I should have explained earlier. You see this funnel icon here, it's the filter. When I drop that down, it shows me restriction toggles. This is very important for any project you do. And what I like to do is I like to click on the selectable and the disable in render. So basically what that does is, if these 4 icons are green, that's all you really need. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the camera, and now the camera is basically unselectable. I cannot mess with the camera while I have this disabled. So now my camera does not move at all. You're done with the camera until you actually need to change it later, right? But you can always go back in camera view by just pressing 0. So 0 for camera view to get in and out of it, and it's very essential. Make sure your num lock is on in that case. So I'm going to go back into my camera view. I'm going to start messing with the objects, because now I want the scene to be filled up with the pipes, right? It's clearly not filling up the scene. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the pipes, and if you see here, there's a move icon. The shortcut for that is G, but I suggest you just press this. Now that what it does is it shows you a very nice handle. I can use these handles. So make sure you don't mess with the z-axis. The z-axis is not to be messed with at all. Only the x and y. So red represents x and y represents green represents y. So as you can see by these handles here, it's quite visible. So I'm not gonna mess with that too much. I'm gonna mess with these handles. I'm gonna adjust the x-axis, adjust my y-axis. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna click on the wrench tab, drop down this menu. So this you need to make sure you know what modifies for what. This modifier is to control the length. I don't need so much length, so I can go down in length now. I'm gonna do that. This needs to be untouched. This modifier needs to be untouched. You're not dealing with that modifier anymore. This modifier deals with the width, how many rows I'm gonna have. And now I fill the camera up with rows. That's it. You're done with the pipes. You're done messing with the pipes arrangement anyway. What you're gonna do is now I'm gonna Shift D to duplicate these pipes and drag and drop this into my backup. So now I have a backup of the arrangement of the pipes. It's a very useful workflow in my opinion. You need to learn how to do this. Now, this is a little tricky part. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start applying these, oopsie, I made a boo-boo. I'm gonna start applying these modifiers. So what you wanna do is, now you had 3 modifiers, you need to start applying them in order. So the top one gets applied first, the next one gets applied first, applies first. Because how Blender sees it is, I just control Z all of that. What Blender sees it, first applies this modifier, then this modifier, then this modifier. Okay, so now this is the tricky part. I'm going to click on select my object, and I'm going to go, okay, so I'm going to go into tab or drop down edit mode. The shortcut for that is tab, but I suggest if you're new to it, you might as well just choose, just do the drop down. So I'm going to go to edit mode, and as you can see, this is all one object. I need to make this many different instances. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to make a new collection and call that pipes. I'm going to drag my base cylinder into the pipes, and then now you see everything's in this collection. So the thing is, you need to first put this in a collection, then do what I'm about to do, and that is I'm going to click A. I'm going to click A, and A selects everything in the scene. And if you click F3 is a search shortcut. What that does is if I search for separate by loose paths, everything, now all of these pipes, which are actually just instances of each other duplicated, becomes separate objects. And as you can see, we have now a ton of separate objects. In fact, we have 1170 separate objects. We won't need all of that. This is where we start cutting down on stuff. Okay, so from here, all you do is get out of edit mode into object mode. And now we need to start making the system more efficient. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press A to select everything in the scene. Whatever, make sure your camera is unselectable. Also get selected, and we don't want the camera to be selected. So make sure the camera is unselectable. You have to toggle this off. And now I'm going to go to object, set origin to center of mass. This is essential because in the physics simulation I don't want it to be any variables I cannot control. And I'm going to go to camera view, and I want to start deleting pipes because you don't need all of these pipes in the simulation. No, that just takes up too much space. I want to box select. So box select is basically hold your mouse click. For me it's right click, but Blender gives you the option to choose left or right. Again, it comes down to your personal I don't know how you chose it, but if you're a right click user, then you need to do something. I'm not sure exactly, I'm sorry. So I'm basically going to hold my mouse key, drag into the box select. As you can see, there are pipes that are not inside the camera view. You need to make sure whatever pipes were chosen are not inside the camera. So I can just press the delete key and now they're gone. And that saves me a lot of vertices because now my vertices went down by 20,000. I want to keep reducing that. I want to choose a side, and I think that's good. Delete. Oh, there we go. Same on this side. Delete. I want to do a little bit more. Make sure it's now visible within the camera. So what you want to do is we do a very small part and delete this bit by bit. So what that does is if it becomes too difficult to handle, a little more. Yes, that's it. Done. That's it. Simple. So now what we have done is we have condensed everything and we've made a more efficient packing system. So now we have all the pipes we'll actually need for the rendering. We won't have more, we don't have to less. So now we can go ahead and start setting up the physics simulation. Okay, so for the physics simulation part, this is the rigid body physics simulation. And as you know, Blender has some simulation work. You can do a rigid body, soft body, fluid and smoke simulation, which is actually pretty cool. I have never messed with a soft body. I have done some smoke and liquid simulation before, but as far as I know, I'm very confident in my rigid body simulation stuff. And what I want to tell you guys is if you're past high school or you're like in the school range, if you're a school student or you're in college, all I want you to know is have a basic sense of physics and common sense. If you know your physics well, even the most basic physics, it's helpful in this case scenario because you're going to deal with stuff like gravity, you're going to deal with stuff like iteration, solving steps. So a little bit of math and a little bit of physics is important at this part. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select my object, and now as you can see, all my objects have individual instances. I'm not choosing the entire pack. So now what I'm going to do is I want to choose one pipe. I'm going to go down to the physics tab. You can see this circle. I think it's like a planet revolving around the sun kind of an icon. And choose that. I'm going to click on rigid body. Now this is important because you don't want to screw up here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to active. I am not going to touch anything else. Another thing I want you guys to be relieved about is don't worry about the settings. We're going to be very minimal with changing settings. It's all going to be mostly default settings. All you have to do is just click one or two buttons and you're done. It's very simple. I'm going to show you the most effective way of doing this. Just chill, man. It's all okay. So as soon as I click on rigid body, all I had to do is change the shape to cylinder. Because what it does is Blender will simplify the shape of the object, the shape of the mesh, so that it doesn't become too difficult to calculate and basically doesn't destroy your PC. All I need is actually just the cylinder. That's it. It's very simple. It's very easy. And now I have my rigid body. So as you probably also realized is I've applied it to one object and not all of them, and that's a justified doubt. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my camera view by pressing 0, and I'm going to first look at my scene. So as you can see, I need to first make sure that only my pipes is selectable, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to press A and everything in the scene gets selected. but everything that I don't want to be selected needs to be unselectable. So basically, it needs to be either hidden or it needs to be unselectable. So the camera is unselectable right now, and that's really important. You need to realize that during the entire step. I'm gonna click on object, and if you go down here, there's a tab called rigid body, and all I'm gonna do is just hover over it. I'm not gonna click, I'm gonna hover over it and go down to copy from active. And what that does is it's gonna take a little time to load, so you're just gonna have to wait for it to finish loading. It may not respond for a little bit, but don't worry, just don't close Blender, be a little patient. And what that does is now every single one of these instances is a rigid body with a cylinder shape, right? That's under collisions. You're done dealing with the rigid body of the pipes. Now we're going to start introducing elements to support the pipes. One thing I should have explained earlier, and now I think now is a good time to explain, is as I hit the pipes, actually I can show you this. If I click space, the pipes start to fall, and that's not desirable, right? Even if I go to my scene settings here, this tab over here with this cone, magnifying glass, sphere, whatever, and I switch out gravity, that solves the problem, but that's not exactly ideal because I need gravity for the pipes to fall back down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep gravity on, and I'm going to now get a box under it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first drag this down because I don't need this in my view. Okay, so another thing I kind of screwed up, and that's my fault, is that these pipes are not aligned to the center. And while that's not really a problem, it is something I prefer to have as, you know, myself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the top view, select all the objects, and this time I mean select all the objects including the camera, and just lightly nudge it to the center. So now what happens is now it's at the center, and now I can add objects to the material. So it's just the me thing, but if you prefer to, that's a little trick of how to do it. So I'm going to switch off the camera toggle. I'm going to shift S. So what that does is brings up a menu, and now that moves its 3D cursor around, and the 3D cursor is this nice little thing that follows you when you click. I think it's left click for most people, but I'm not sure. It always comes down to how you choose it in the splash screen. That said, it's not here. So when you first time open Blender, you choose what click you want, and whatever click you make default, left or right, that moves around your 3D cursor, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open that menu, and I'm going to choose cursor to origin. Then I'm going to press Shift A. That's my shortcut to add stuff. Objects. I'm going to choose to add a cube. I'm going to scale the cube, pressing S and just moving my mouse. Scales the cube uniformly. I'm going to move the cube down. Okay, so now we're going to start setting up the base. But once we have the cube inside, I'm going to select the cube and go to edit mode. I'm going to choose face select and choose the top face. And I'm going to Shift S to move my cursor to selected. So we did world origin last time, now we're doing selected. Now that the cursor is at selected, I'm going to get out of edit mode to object mode. And like we did that time, we're going to shift the origin now to the 3D cursor. And what that does is I move the origin to the 3D cursor of the layer. I've moved the origin to the... So what I've done now is move the origin of the cube to the top surface of the cube, and that's essential now because when I start setting up the base, I don't want to have to deal with math. I want to just deal with, you know, moving stuff around. So what I'm going to do is now I'm going to hide the cube, and I'm going to go to 7. What that does is 7 is the top orthographic view, right? Numblock, make sure numblock is on, and click 7. That's if you have a keypad, by the way. And then I'm going to press 9. What 9 does, it changes it to the bottom. So now I'm seeing, as you see, the top corner of your of Blender, it shows bottom orthographic view. 7 is at the top, and what 9 does, it goes to the bottom, or the exact opposite of what you're facing. So if I press 1 to do front view, and then I press 9 to do I do 9 to press the back view. So now 9 is doing the exact opposite. So top, now I'm at the bottom and I need to look at the bottom. So what I had to do is I'm going to shift S, move my cursor to world origin. I'm going to look for the closest pipe to the world origin, and it's this one. I'm going to select it, go into edit mode. I'm going to now go to edge select mode. This is essential. Go to edge select. It chooses these edges. I'm going to hold alt and right click, or I don't know if it's different for you guys. Again, it comes down to what your default selection when you first time open Blender is, but for me it's right click. Selecting any object is right click for me. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to go again, press shift S, and I'm going to move my cursor to selected. What that does is now my 3D cursor is at the center of all of those vertices, or all of those edges, right? So now what I'm going to do is, now my 3D cursor is there. I'm going to open the cube, select the cube, and then what I'm going to do is go to object, snap, and then selection to cursor. So what that does is it moves the origin of the object, bringing the object with it to the cursor. So now I have a perfectly flat leveled plane. Both of these surfaces, the pipe surface and the top surface of the cube, now touch each other. They just touch each other. So now I have a base, a flat base, for which now the gravity won't affect. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the dimension. So you see this when you press the N to open the transformation tab. I'm just going to reduce the size here, and then increase X and Y axis. Another way of doing it is just pressing S and scaling, and that's enough. So as long as you know it covers everything, you're good, right? And now what I'm going to do, this is essentially important. I'm going to press the disable render tab. Disables the render. So now when I render this, it's not visible in my render. This is very important, and this is how you remove artifacts that are not supposed to be in the render. So when you do booleans or stuff like that, that's another topic for the future. You can hide the boolean stuff using this toggle icon. So I've done that, and now I'm going to go back to, I'm going to choose the cube, go to the physics tab, click on rigid body, and I'm just going to change this to passive. I'm going to open collisions and change this to box. If this was a convex, okay, you know what, there's another mistake I made. So I made this mistake before where I chose box once, and what that did is when I started the simulation, yep, that happened. It's not exactly pleasant. You don't want your objects to just fly off. This is why test simulation is also important. So what you do is if you just press space, it starts moving this around, and you don't want this, you don't want the objects to start flying around. This is a very common problem, and I've faced this a lot. So what I've done is I just click on box and I chose mesh. Since this is a very simple box and I choose mesh, I don't have to worry about stuff like the exploding stuff. So when I click space, now they haven't exploding. So this is very important. And another thing I should mention is what passive does is it just sets up the rigid body, but it only stays. The rigid body is not animated. It doesn't have to be active. It doesn't have to follow gravity. It doesn't have to follow any of the laws of physics. It just exists as a stiff body. That's all I'm doing. That's all I need to do. Also, I want to rename this cube to base first, and then I'm going to shift D and press the Z key. Because what I've done is I've duplicated the instance using shift D, and if I press Z, it now moves the instance along the Z axis. So now that's my stopper plane. I'm going to name this stopper plane. And I'm going to now, this essentially stops the pipes from flying away. Pipes generally don't fly away, but I don't want them to get so high up that I can't control how high they fly up. So what I'm doing is now this is the stopper plane, and this since you duplicate it, it already has the rigid body, and you don't have to mess with the physics tab. But I do want you to reduce the Z axis, dimension, make it a little less thick. And what you can do is now with the move handle, if you want to move anything, always use the move handle, or you can use the shortcut G, and you can move it along any axis depending on the XYZ keys you press. but I don't want to move it like that. I want to move it like this, because then I have a lot more visual control, right? So I'm gonna do that, and I like how that looks. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set up the height. And the problem is when I go to camera view now this object is in the way. Okay, also like to stop, like the base, you need to disable the render, and basically you don't need to deal with the base anymore. You can toggle off the selection. But for this, what I want you to do is, now since it's getting in the way of the camera, it won't be rendered, so the camera won't render it, but it'll still be visible in the viewport. This is the viewport, by the way. What I want to do is I'm going to click on object properties, this tab here, it's an orange tab here, and if I go down to viewport display, it gives me this menu where if you go to display as, I can make it display as a texture, solid, wire, bounce. I'm going to make it as a wire. So basically it's not visible, but it still exists, so I can see it through its wires, right? And oopsie, I made a boo-boo. What I'm going to do is now I'm going to just do that. Yes, I like that. So I'm going to toggle off selection. If I press space, it basically runs, it's like a test simulation. And what that does is, I know if anything is going to go wrong, I can just check it right now. And it's also loading that simulation here. So you can see, if nothing's exploding, congratulations, you have done excellent. Now, I'm going to switch off the visibility of the stopper and the base. You don't need them anymore. They are done. The only thing you might want to do is with the stopper is adjust the height in case you don't like how the pipes are rising later, but that's a little later. I'm 50 minutes in the recording and I have not even done halfway of the tutorial. This is going to be a long tutorial. So now as you guys saw, when the pipes jumped up that time, when the pipes jump up, I only want them to move in the Z axis. They don't need to move in the X, they don't need to move in the Y, they only need to move in the Z, right? No X and no Y, please. That's bad. We don't want that, right? Okay, so I don't want them to move in all directions. So what I'm going to do for that is, if you remember, we switched off the toggle selectability of everything, and that's for a good reason. It's because when I click A again, I'm going to first choose one pipe and click A, and if you see one pipe is orange, other pipes are red, make sure you have at least one pipe that's orange. And then I'm going to hold Alt, my Alt key. I'm going to start pressing the lock. So I'm going to first lock up all the rotations. I'm going to lock up the X and Y axis. What the Alt key does is it duplicates whatever changes you're making to all the other selected objects. And now what that does is, now we did this pipe, and now all these other pipes have this restriction. So now when you create the instigator and you start hitting it around, they don't fly off in random directions, which is good. So now we're done setting up a rigid body simulation. We've just done the setup. This is the little bit fun part. What I'm going to do is Shift A. I'm going to add a sphere. I prefer you add a UV sphere. I'm just going to scale it up. You don't need to make any changes to it in the menu. All you do is now look at that. So now that's my UV sphere, and this is my instigator. This is what I'm going to use. Also, it again, make sure it does not go into the pipes collection. No matter what I do, it ends up there, but you need to make sure to avoid it going into the pipe selection. We don't want that to be a problem down the line. So now I'm going to call this my instigator. There might be a better word than instigator. I don't know if that's the right word, but I'm just saying. So now I'm going to go press 1. So make sure your num block's on and press 1. And that takes me to front orthographic view. So what I'm going to do is, now I'm in the front orthographic view. I'm going to go to edit mode. And this is where we start modeling. This is a little bit of modeling like we did for the pipes, but this is more manual. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go up to the corner, and you can see these 4. I'm going to click on the leftmost side option, and that is the wireframe mode. What that does is, now it shows me wires instead of solid. And that means when I do this, it now chooses all the points along that axis. So now whatever I chose in the box selection is now chosen. The problem with that is, if I did the same thing in solid view, it wouldn't choose all the vertices, but I'm pressing 1 to go to front orthographic view. If I go to wireframe mode and I do this, now everything is chosen. So that's important. If you want to choose, if you want to like do an x-ray and choose points that are not visible, you need to go to wireframe mode. And I'm going to go ahead and delete these vertices. I'm pressing the delete key, and when it shows the menu, I'm pressing vertices. You need to do all of this in edit mode, by the way. Then I'm going to choose the edge select mode. I'm going to drag down a little bit. So you choose the middle mouse, again, middle mouse button to move around. I should have mentioned that. And now I'm going to alt, holding the alt key, I'm going to select one edge. And what that does is selects all the connected edges. And now the connected edges mean the edges in the circle. And I'm going to press the F key. The F key is a fill key. It fills in a face. So now I have a face. Now this is where I come back to solid view, because I don't need to do this anymore. I can hide, if you press this checkbox here, it basically hides a layer, because I don't want to see the pipes right now. I just want to model the instigator. I'm going to go to vertex selection mode. And now this is another personal choice here. You can choose the shape of the top to affect pipes differently. As you saw in the sample render, I chose a biscuit size model. Basically how I did that was I went to vertex select, choose the top vertex. I'm going to go up here to proportional editing. You see this tab over here? I click on that, and then I click on the move. So now I'm seeing the move handles, and this is important, right? Okay, and I think this is where you need to learn the shortcuts now. If I hold G and I press Z, so now I'm moving this vertex in the Z axis. And if I scroll up with my scroll down with my scroll key, it's creating this circle which influences all the other vertices around the point. So I'm gonna increase the circle just about this much, where it affects mostly all the points except the bottom few vertices. And I'm gonna bring this down. I'm gonna enlarge my circle, and now I'm gonna just click to do that. I'll switch off proportional editing because I don't need that anymore, and I'll get out of edit mode into object mode. And what I've done is I created a cookie shape instigator. You can make any shape you want. You make a star shape, cube shape, or you can do this entire sphere. You can do anything, but I prefer a more rounded option like the big sphere. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scale it up a little bit. Press S to scale. I'm going to re-enable pipes, and I'm going to scale according to the pipes. So what I'm also going to do is now take this up, and you need to choose one Z-axis layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this much. So I want my instigator to touch the pipes at that much. I don't want the rest of the instigator to touch it. So once I adjust the Z-axis, I'm going to switch off the Z-axis mover. So I lock the Z-axis. So now I can only move the X and Y axis, which is important. If you want, scale it down a little more. And I'm going to scale it down a little more. And yeah, so now I want this much to touch the pipes. I'm going to press Z-axis lock, and now this is my instigator. And when I animate my instigator, it starts moving the objects up and down, right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to give the instigator a physics property. We're going to give it a rigid body. So I'm going to go to the physics tab while choosing the instigator, click on rigid body, have it active, and I'm going to switch off dynamic and choose animated. And I'm also going to go down to collision and choose box, or not box, I want to choose mesh. That's it, nothing else. You're done with dealing with that. So now I have dealt with the now I've given the instigator a rigid body. If I click space, that's weird. So if you look at the scale of this plane, it's in very messy numbers. I don't want to be in very messy numbers. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on I'm going to click A. So what that does now, when I click Control A and do the scale, everything is now at scale. So it's 1. So this is the true value of its the size now. And now we don't have to be worried about some uncontrollable variable again. And I'm gonna start deselecting everything else. Oh, and there you go. Okay, now we're having it. So what I faced an issue was when I had the instigator in place. I wanna hide the stopper plane and the base. When I had the instigator in place, it wasn't actually popping, and this was concerning me. But now you can see the pipes have risen up, and they've hit the stopper plane. So if I look at from the camera view, they've hit the stopper plane, and you can already see now there's a problem. That's way too high. I want to choose my stopper plane. I want to just slide down, right? And then I'm going to do that. So when I go back to 0, it basically resets the animation, and now it recalculates everything, and that's fine. In my original animation, it wasn't this high, but I'm not doing my original animation. You can set the height of the stopper to be anything you want. You see this orange and yellow line loading. That basically shows your animation, your physics, the physics animation, the physics simulations being cached. And I'm going to show you how to cache it and bake it. But for now, all you need to know is that this is actually working. And now here's a quick animation tip. I'm going to choose the object, and you need to now know how many frames you want. Now there's something I should have told you earlier, but it's fine now also. What I want is, how long do I want my animation to be? That's the question. My original animation was around 6 to 7 seconds, but this one I like, and 6 to 7 seconds. This is where you do the math also. So if I go to the camera tab, if I go down here to the printer tab, it's called the output tab. You can see these three. These three is very essential, and you should know what these do. Frame rate is basically 24 FPS, 30 FPS. I think if you are a student if you're a student in the filming major, design major, art major, or if you're like if you're like a geek who knows all this, then that's cool. But the frame rate is important, 24 FPS. I like to have it at 30 because that makes the math easy. So if I want to have 6 seconds, 6 into 30 is 240 frames. No, 6 into 30 is 180 frames. My bad math. And now I just need 180 frames. So if I want 6 seconds, I want to change this to 180 seconds. That's my entire animation. I'll be 180 frames, which is 6 seconds. I want to drag this back down. I want it to be very visible. And now we want to start off easy. So when you start the scene, everything needs to settle. We don't want to start the animation as soon as the scene pops up. So now for that, what we do is when I go here, I think for the first 1 second, we will have the image be still. Or for half of the first second, we have everything be still. So this is where we start animating stuff. And what I want to do is I'm going to go to frame 20, click on scale, and insert keyframes. What I've done is now I've inserted the keyframes, and the yellow means that's a keyframe. Green means there's no keyframe here, but it's animated, and red means, oh, you're choosing the new keyframe, please enable that. So if I did this, now it's red. I need to replace, I forgot, it's either right click or left click. It depends on you, but you can either type down the scale, and when you right click, that's right click for me anyway, I click replace keyframes, and now that's a keyframe, and I don't want that. I want us all to be equal. So I'm also going to go back to frame 20, and I'm going to start typing. I'm going to click on this and start typing in 0, and I'm going to insert keyframes. Now I have 2 keyframes, and what this does is for the first 20 seconds, right? First 20 seconds of simulation, it's just there. The instigator does not exist. I had to scale it into existence, and now it needs to start moving around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back 5 frames, and I'm going to go to the location. On the X, I'm going to click insert keyframes. So you need to either right click or left click. I'm not sure what your preference is. I'm going to right click, replace keyframes. What I'm going to do is now I'm going to click 7. Make sure your num lock's on, 7, and then 9. So I've explained that to you. And what I'm going to do is I want to click this key here. It's called auto keying. What I do is if I click that, and I go to some random frame and I make a change, it automatically gets, sorry, the value for that automatically gets set on its own, and you don't have to worry about it later. So I'm gonna go to frame 15, and if I click play, then it's gonna do this for me, right? So it's gonna run the timeline. So what I wanna do is you see the blue box here? So as soon as you click play with the space bar, you need to start moving the object with the blue box as the thing moves, right? And as soon as the counter reaches 160, I'm about to show you. So space, now I start moving, and now the counter is about to reach 160, I stop. So what that does is, as soon as I reach 160, I stop, and then what I do is, when it reaches 160, so at 160, if you have excess keyframes, just right click, it turns orange, and delete them. Press the delete key, okay? And at 160, and I go to 165, and then I start typing in these values, and then I replace keyframes. So now what I'm doing is, I'm removing it out of existence. I'm scaling it out of existence. So now when I scale out of existence, I give the pipes time to settle down to about 150, 210. Again, you need to choose what your end frame rate is, what your ending frame is. I can make this 210 also, or 200 also. It can be any number, but if you want a fixed value, I suggest you do a multiple of 30. Or if your frame rate is 130, if your frame is 30 FPS, if your frame is 24 FPS, multiple of 24. But it really doesn't matter. And now I scale out of existence. What I do is, after frame 165, I'm giving that much time for it to settle down. And then once all of that is done, once you have done this animation process, you are done with the instigator. I'm gonna remove the instigator from disable it from rendering. If you see in the top left, I want to remove the instigator from toggleable. I'm also gonna untoggle the selection of the stopper plane. So now the stopper plane is also done. And now this is the important part. Do not run the simulation just yet. Make sure you take the thing back to 0, the line, and then I go to scene properties. So we have been here before. We go to the scene properties over here, and then under rigid body world, I want to drop that down. I'm going to start doing some changes. So this is where we start making a more system friendly. I think if you've noticed, maybe the simulation's been too slow and it's been causing your laptop to crash. I'm sorry for that, but a simple way to circumvent that is to change the substeps and solve iterations to 5. What that does, solve iterations and substeps basically counts the number of iterations, and it performs a calculation that many times for each frame. And I don't want it to do 10, and the more, of course, the more calculations you do, the more accurate it is to real world. This is not a real world simulation. This is just a simulation for animation's sake. It doesn't have to be accurate. You can take it down to 3, 2, 1. I want to keep it at 5 because I don't want it to get too inaccurate. Then that may start bringing problems in. But now I've changed that to 5. I want to pull that setting back up. I want to drop down the cache setting. This is important because this is now how you bake or turn all this animation into keyframes. Once you turn that into keyframes, then it starts playing back smoothly, and then you don't have any lag. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to cache, turn this to 180, because that's how many frames I have, and I'm going to click bake. When I click bake, it's fast for me, but it may be slow for you. It's going to bake. It might take a minute or two. It might take 5. Yesterday when I was doing this, there were times when simulations were taking 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Now that I've done this so many times, it's taking a minute or two because I know what settings to use. But 180, and then you click bake. So what that does is, you see there's this entire orange line. That means the simulation has been baked. And when I click spacebar to play, you can now see that's your animation. So I think I need to give it some more time to settle. I'm gonna delete this bake and extend it to 210. So I want to finish the animation when all the pipes settle. I'm gonna click bake, And if I take a look now, you can go to camera view, and of course now it's a bit too high, it's escaping the frame. I might have to give this more frames, I say 220, but again, this is your length. You want, you can animate the instigator down to 150, 100, 130 frames, however long you want, and then you can give it extra frames to wait for it all to settle down. And yeah, it's all settling down. And that's it. You're done. Now you just do all the adjustments. If you want, I think this is a bit too high, so I'm going to delete the bake. I'm going to enable the toggle, I'm going to enable the stopper plane, and I'm just going to drag it. Okay, make sure after you're done animating the instigator, you switch off auto keying, or it might present problems later. It's always important to switch off toggle keying after you don't need it anymore. I'm gonna bring this down lower. I think that's good. It might be a little too low. Okay, I'm gonna click bake again. So it's gonna recalculate everything. Again, might take a minute or two, might take 5, but it's worth it because then now you have a smooth playback. And my god, that looks much better, right? Again, you may want to reduce stopper plane height. You may want to have more pipes. You need to decide all of this in the beginning. So now we're gonna get into the texturing phase. Okay, so now we're going to start texturing, and what texturing does is basically I'm going to give it a color like how you saw that time. I want to give it color, I want to give it properties. So if you go back here, you see there these options: viewport shading versus material preview, and then there's viewport shading, rendered. So this is the rendered view. By the way, this is important to note, you need to be on EV for the time being. If you want to do cycles, I'll show you cycles, but my recommended mode of doing this is EV, because if you have a weak system, you need to use EV, because EV does the entire rendering in under 5-10 minutes. If you do cycles, each frame can take a minute, and 220 frames, 1 minute each, is around 4 hours, a little under 4 hours. Yeah, so it's basically a very long render. So for now we start with EV, and as you can see, first of all, when I go to the rendered view in EV, you can see it's all dark. There's no light, there's nothing. Make sure before you continue, you have everything that does not need to be rendered switched off. So the backup I have here needs to be switched off of render. The base needs to switch off and render. Instigator stop playing. The only thing I need to be seen rendering has to be the pipes. You can leave the camera on because the camera is what's rendering stuff. The camera is what's seeing stuff, so it honestly doesn't matter. But everything else that does not need to be seen needs to be switched off. Then, as you can see now, there's no lighting. And in a traditional situation, I'm just going to show an example, but we don't actually need this. In a traditional situation, I want to click Shift A, go to lights, and I'm going to choose an area light. And then I use the handle to raise it up higher. Click S to scale. And then now I'm going to click on the light bulb here and increase the wattage. So I'm going to just type in about 1000, which is clearly not enough. I'm going to click 10,000. So again, the amount of lighting differs. I'm at a scale where everything's about 100 meters tall. So for that, 10,000 watts will not be enough. What will be enough is 100,000 watts. So I can do about 10 million watts, and that's a little too much. Okay, and I'm going to move this up. So now I can also scale this up. So now basically I'm introducing light, and now thanks to the rendering system, it's gonna show you light. Okay, and I can create a top down. If I Shift D this and rotate, I can use this yellow hand to rotate it. I'm creating a two point lighting system. If I don't like the 2 point, I'm gonna shift, okay, and then Shift D and then turn this around. Now I'm not good at lighting, if I had to say, but if I tried, now I have a 3 point lighting system, and that's the basics. So now I have a very soft lighting, very unbiased lighting, and while in viewport you won't be able to see it, but if you look at it right now, it's very soft, unbiased lighting, and that could work. If you wanted to be that, it could work. Then all I had to do is give some color to the pipes, but I don't want to give color to the pipes like this. I don't want to use this lighting. This is a very traditional system of lighting. If you want to use it, you can go ahead and use it. I want to show you how to give it color anyway. So you can either have these lights here, or you can do my method, which for that I am going to go back to my default file. So I switched to my sample file, the pre-done file, and for this, as you can see, there is no lighting. I have not used lighting. That's because I want my objects itself to emit that light. And for what I want to do is, if I go to EV and I click 0 to go to camera view. Okay, so I came back to the file because I want to show you this in I think a little fresh mannerism. I'm going to do is the lighting. Okay, so I accidentally did not save that. So always guys remember to Control S to save that. Is what I can do is I want to go to the material preview, not rendered view, and I'm going to open the same window again. Or I think another thing you can do is, instead of having to open the window, you can always click the shading tab here and then scroll out, and it directly puts you into material preview. And then all I have to do is just select any one random cylinder. So I prefer choosing the edge cylinders because then I don't have to have everything too far off. So I choose an edge cylinder, I click on the new material. So I'm assigning a new material to the edge cylinder. And if I just give it a light, I give it a basic color. So this is called the principled BSDF. It is the mother of all materials. You need this, or at least mostly this, to just have yourself a color. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one object with this color. I'm going to create another new material with a new color, like my blue I used. You can see, if you look carefully, you can see the now colors. I'm going to create a new material with just a little off tint of white. I want to create a purple. I'm going to create a little pink. Again, you can play around with the colors as much as you want, but for the sake of this example, I have 5 colors. Now you can see the 5 colors here in the corner, right? And now we're going to discuss how we're going to arrange these colors. So what you do is, this is a fun thing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my scene. So now to assign colors randomly to all of these pipes, I need to first make sure that anything that does not need to be toggled or selected should be toggled unselectable. So only the pipes are now selectable. Yeah. And then if I go to the left here and I choose select drop down menu, I have a lot of options. So if I choose select random, it chooses pipes at random, any randomness. And if I open this drop down menu, it shows me percentage and seed. Now what a random seed is, a seed is basically a variation, a type of variation. So there's variation number 1, variation number 2, variation number 3. It's choosing 50% of all pipes in different variations. And I don't want to give 50% of the pipes one color. I want to break this down into parts. So basically what I do is, if I have 5 colors, 20% of the entire collection must have each color, is the math. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this 50 down to 20, and it chooses 20% of all the pipes. Make sure it's not choosing any of the colored pipes that you have already assigned. Right? Make sure it's not choosing any of the pipes. So now it has, okay, so now these random pipes have been colored. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose one random color. So shift select any one of these pipes. I shift select orange, and now make sure orange is orange highlighted, because this is the main selection and all of these are sub selections. I'm going to do a shortcut Control plus L, which brings up the linking drop box. I'm going to choose materials. So I'm basically I'm giving all of these oranges a material, right? So now all of these are orange. So I want all of these oranges to now be hidden, because I don't need them anymore. I don't want them to be selected again. So I'm going to press H, shortcut key H, to hide all the selected oranges, right? And then now the next time I do this, I need to go and do the same for every color, except now I had to increase the percentage. So now I have 4 colors, and 4 colors will divide the entire selection 25. So now this be 25%. And then I need to shift select anything that I don't want to be selected. So I don't want my already colored pipes to be selected. So if I shift select them twice, then they're not selected anymore. I think I should have mentioned that earlier. And I'm going to shift select the color I want to assign, and that is cyan. So I'm spelling that right. Control L and click materials again. And now I have blue pipes. I want to click H to hide all of them while they're still selected. And now I have 3 colors to be done between, this. Similarly, I do the same. I do 33%. And then when I have 2 colors left, I want to show you really quick. So I want to select random, 33. I want to choose a random seed. It doesn't matter. And then I want to choose the color. So I want to choose white this time. Right? And deselect the purple because I don't want any of my colored pipes to be recolored. Control L, materials. So now I have pink pipes everywhere. Click H, hidden. Now I do the same again. Random selection, 50%. I'm gonna do with this pink. I don't know which color that is exactly. Control L, materials, hidden. And now I have only 1 color left. So I'm gonna click A to select all the pipes. Shift select purple to make that my main selection. Control L, materials. And now I have all the colors done. What I'm going to do is I'm going to now have to unhide everything. And to that I need to press Alt H, which unhides everything. Which also does bring up everything that does not need to be visible. So for that I'm going to have to rehide instigator, the base and stuff. But besides that, if I go back to the layout, now I have color tabs. And if you had done the 3-point lighting, I'm sorry, that went off. I forgot to save that. Then it will be visible and now you would have that color variation. But now let's move on to a version of the editing I want to do. That's my personal preference. And for that, I want to go back to the file. This is the file we did. And what I did is each of these objects now emit their own light. And I can do that if I choose the emission shader. So what I want to do, I want to hide this from you guys. Don't look at that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to shift A inside the node editor. Shift A, shader, and I'm going to pull out emission. And then emission, I can now drag and drop. You can drag and drop colors between these tabs. And if I drag this emission to the surface and remove instead of principal DSDF, now I have an emission of just blue, just blue emission. I can increase the strength of this emission and make it really strong. If you're using EV, I suggest you enable ambient occlusion, bloom, and subsurface scattering, just as a nice add-on. Bloom really sells the effect, and that really helps. So I don't want it to be that big. I suggest 3 is enough in general. You can do the same for any object. I can just, again, normally I choose between 2 to 3 and I can just have the emission, and that's fine. So I have emissions now. And here's a and if you just do emissions, it looks really good for blend. It looks really good. So I'm gonna adjust that to 2. I think 2 is a good value also. If I just do emissions, it looks really good in EV, right? As you can see, in EV, if I go to camera view, I like that view. And you can make it any color, any emission texture you want, and that looks really nice. So before I show you how to render and the export settings, I'm going to show you how to do this in cycles. And cycles is very different. If I click cycles, you need to know what are the best samples. So cycles works fundamentally very different from EV. If you're on EV, I suggest you do the stock settings. You don't need to change anything in EV. You just need to enable these 3. That's it. Another thing I want to mention is you have to change color management from filmic to standard. So if you go down to color management, change filmic to standard, and it gives you true to life colors. It doesn't give you its very weird ass colors. You can also set the contrast, right? So if you come down here, you can set high contrast, medium contrast, very low contrast, medium low contrast. I like medium low contrast for myself, but again, it comes down to you. So make sure before you color or start texturing, you change this to standard. We are 1 hour 27 minutes in. Oh god. And now when you go to cycles, my suggestion is you change sample size to 32. I've done the experimentation. If you do the exact same way I did, if you change sample size to 32, then what that does is, in an animation anyway, you can't tell the difference between 32, 256 and 64, because in the animation it's all moving. If you want to do a still render, then I suggest you bump it up to 256 or higher. Normally 128 is also enough sample size, but the difference between each sample is phenomenally different, but you really can't tell it when it comes to animation. So a minimum of 32, I suggest do a minimum of 32, and you also enable denoising. So you can do the open, if you have an Intel CPU, but if you don't have a RTX or GTX graphics card, I suggest you do open image denoise. But for those of you who have an RTX or a GTX card, you can enable render viewport denoising and have them both set to optics. It's really nice. It really smoothens out the frame work and everything looks really good. Another thing is color management. Again, I suggest you do the same thing. As you can see, if you see carefully, in cycles, the texture I use for Eevee does not look good. And if you compare it with the other texture, that is the white, it actually has the pipe feeling. I'm going to show you how to create the pipe material right now. And to do that it's this node tree here. So basically what I've done, I'm going to delete all of this and I'm going to show you from scratch. I'm going to copy this value though. So what I'm going to do is, basically, if I want to have my principal BSDF, if you want to add it, you just have to shift A, go to shader and principal BSDF, but I have mine already. I want to take that emission, I want to scale it down a little bit. So now what you do in the principal BSDF is you do some differences. You can keep the roughness to 0.5, you don't need to change roughness at all, but I suggest you increase specular to 1 and alpha to 0.4, 0.35. What alpha does, it gives that semi-transparent look, not like glass, that's transmission, but we don't want the glass feel because then you have to consider refraction and all that. No, I just want alpha. I want to reduce the opacity, and then I do that, and then all I have to do from here is I shift A. You can search for a mix shader, and then you do this, and then when you click when you mix these two together, you have that transparent orange feel. My suggestion is you have the principal BSDF at the top and then emission at the bottom. And the mix shade is a very powerful node. It helps you mix any principled shaders at all times. These shaders all have different properties, which is very interesting. But if you have the mix shader, it's very powerful. Right now we're just gonna not plug anything into factorial, we're just going to reduce factorial to 0.29, and then you see more of the alpha and less of the emission. So then the scene is producing its own light thanks to the emission shader, but then it's also just very self-reliant. And I can do the same thing for the pink, right? All of these materials share the same, they all share the same texture, so you don't have to go to individual materials and change them. All I have to do is just attach my pre-made mix shader, and then look at how those pipes look, and they look drastically different. Trust me. This is the ending of the video, and that is the last tip I can give you. That is the render settings. So in cycles, I've told you, if you're doing cycles, do 32 samples, and if you're doing Eevee, do 64 samples. Again, but you may want to use different textures for both of them because they yield different results. An emission texture alone in Eevee looks really nice, but it doesn't look that great in cycles. In cycles, you want to use this a little more complex. So the power of the node tree here is you can create very complex textures like the one I've made here. It's an example of one of the previous renders I made for my portfolio, and it was very difficult to work, but it's very enjoyable. There's so much potential you have with these nodes. So I'm gonna for now choose cycles because that's my preference. You might want to remember cycles might take anywhere between 4 to 8 hours to render the entire animation. So if you don't have a very strong PC, I suggest you can use Eevee. But if you have a decent CPU, a good graphics card, you can use cycles. But that will still take 4 hours. This animation took 4 hours to render 8 seconds, which is kind of frustrating, but that's the best I can do right now. So then I go to this. This is called the output properties. What you do here is you first set your resolution. If again, I like to do my renders at 1080p, but if you want, you can always set this down to 1280 by 720, and it makes the render much faster. You don't have to change anything with the camera. You just need to make sure you input the correct resolution. Make sure your frame rate and everything is fine. For this, I showed you 30 FPS earlier, but in actuality, this one was 24. And then you had to drop down the output menu. Now, this is very important. Normally, by default, the output chooses PNG. I don't want you to do PNG unless and until you have the convenience of wanting to do PNG. No, I want you to choose FFmpeg video. And then when you drop down the encoder and changes from Matroska to MPEG-4. So that's basically MPG-4. Then you drop down video even further and you can change the quality. I like to do high quality, but that again increases the render time. When I do this setting, it renders around a minute per frame, again, which extends out to 4 hours. By default, render has /tmp/ as your render save file. You don't want to do that. You want to click on the folder and find where you want to do that. So I'm not going to show you that. You can save it anywhere you want. I have it saved somewhere specific already. But besides that, you can choose to render where you want. And then when you're finally done with everything, you come to the top left corner, click render and choose render animation. And then you just wait. Right? It renders the animation out for you. And then that's it, guys. I guess that's it for this video. If you want me to show you the same for Eevee, 64 samples, don't have to do anything. Just go to the dimensions, do the same setting here. If you're on Eevee, you can definitely do 1920 by 1080 because it doesn't take very long. Because then when I go to the render and I click render animation, now it's animating every frame like this. So one frame is taking 1 second. So 210 frames will take 5 minutes. Maybe more, maybe less. I'm not doing the math right now. But that's it. That's basically it, guys. So I hope you like this video a lot. Give this video a big thumbs up. Please share this video with your friends. There's so many ways of doing this. There's not one way. You don't have to do it in Blender alone. You can learn in After Effects. You can do this anywhere else. I'm trying to learn After Effects right now, so I'm not doing an After Effects. But if I do figure it out, maybe I'll try that too. But that's it for this video, guys. Hope you like this video a lot. Give this video a big thumbs up. Share this video with your friends. And I'll see you guys in the next video. That is Genshin Impact 1.5. That's right. I'm going to react to that. Actually, my laptop just finished updating that version. So the new version just came out today. I'm going to play that, react, record, and then probably upload that after this video. So thanks, guys, and see you later. Goodbye.